The size of this, honestly, shocked me. I know how that sounds. That's exactly why I'm writing this from a throwaway account instead of my real one, because if anyone I knew saw that sentence attached to my name, they'd immediately assume this is some ridiculous sexual confession. Maybe it is, eventually. But not in the way people think. I'm 35, married for 12 years, and until 6 months ago I honestly believed cheating was something other people did. Broken people. Cruel people. People in miserable marriages. Not women like me. My husband, Aaron, is a good man. That's what makes this harder to explain. If he were abusive or cold, maybe this would feel simpler somehow. But he isn't. He remembers my coffee order, calls my dad every birthday without reminders, and still reaches for my hand in parking lots out of habit after more than a decade together. From the outside, we looked stable. Inside the marriage, though, things had gone quiet. Not fighting. Not drama. Just emotional silence. Like we slowly became coworkers managing a shared life instead of two people actually seeing each other. I didn't even realize how numb I'd become until the box. Yes, a literal box. About 2 months ago our basement flooded after heavy rain, so we spent an entire weekend sorting through old storage containers and ruined cardboard. I found this dark gray plastic case shoved behind old Christmas decorations. It was heavier than I expected. That was the first thing I noticed. The size of it. The weight. I joked, "What do you even keep in here?" "Gold bars." Aaron crossed the room way too fast after I said that. "Just old work stuff," he replied. Something about the way he grabbed it bothered me instantly. Not anger. Nervousness. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. My husband had secrets. That sounds dramatic, but after 12 years together, secrecy feels louder than shouting. 3 nights later, while Aaron slept on the couch after too much wine, curiosity completely consumed me. I went downstairs and opened the box. Inside were sketchbooks. Dozens of them. Every single page filled with drawings of me. Not exaggerated romantic portraits either. Real moments. Me asleep with my hair covering my face. Me reading on the patio. Me crying after my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. The detail made my chest tighten. Aaron had apparently spent years secretly drawing me. Years. And I never knew. Then I found the final sketchbook. The newer drawings felt different somehow. Sadder. Less alive. Near the back, folded between pages, was a hotel receipt. Dinner for 2. Wine. 1 room. And written across the back in unfamiliar handwriting. "You deserve to feel wanted again." I felt physically sick. I sat on the basement floor staring at those words while the entire foundation of my marriage suddenly felt unstable beneath me. I wanted to wake Aaron up immediately and demand answers. Instead, I quietly put everything back exactly where I found it. The next morning, he kissed my forehead before work like always, and I almost started crying from guilt because technically he didn't even know yet that I'd invaded his privacy. But the sentence wouldn't leave my head. "You deserve to feel wanted again." Wanted by who? And why did another woman think my husband needed that? I wish I could say that was the moment everything fell apart. It wasn't. The real disaster started 4 days later when I met Caleb. And honestly, I think some broken part of me was already emotionally searching for something before he ever walked into my life. I met Caleb because of a broken elevator. That sounds fake, but it's true. I manage leasing for a commercial office building downtown, and one Tuesday morning the main elevator stopped between floors with 3 people trapped inside screaming like they were in a disaster movie. By the time the repair crew arrived, half the tenants were already complaining to me personally as if I had physically broken the elevator myself. That's when I first saw him. Caleb was standing near the open maintenance panel arguing calmly with another technician about wiring diagrams while everyone else around him panicked. The first thing I noticed wasn't that he was attractive. It was how calm he sounded. Steady. Controlled. Like the kind of person who naturally lowers the temperature in a chaotic room. Eventually, he looked over at me and smiled slightly. "We'll have it running soon," he said. That should have been forgettable. Instead, I remembered his voice for the rest of the day. Which already feels pathetic admitting out loud. At that point, nothing inappropriate happened. I was still emotionally spiraling over Aaron, the sketches, the receipt, the possibility that my husband had cheated on me or at least emotionally crossed some line I didn't understand. But Caleb kept returning to the building throughout the week because the elevator problem turned out to be more complicated than expected. And slowly, without meaning to, I started noticing him. The tattoo near his wrist. The way he remembered people's names immediately. How he actually listened when someone talked instead of waiting for his turn to speak. Small things. Dangerous things. One afternoon, I was sitting alone in my office trying not to cry over absolutely nothing when Caleb knocked lightly on the open door. "You okay?" I laughed automatically and gave the standard answer. "Just tired." He leaned against the door frame for a second and said quietly, "You don't look tired. You look sad." That sentence hit me harder than it should have. Because I couldn't remember the last time someone noticed the difference. Aaron used to. Years ago. Before our marriage slowly turned into routines and schedules and exhausted silence. I made some awkward joke about adulthood being disappointing, and Caleb smiled. "I think most people are lonelier than they admit," he said. God. That sentence stayed in my head for days afterward. And that's when things became dangerous. Not because we flirted. Because we connected. People talk about affairs like they begin with attraction, but honestly, I think mine started with recognition. The terrifying feeling of another person understanding parts of you that haven't felt understood in years. Soon we started talking regularly whenever he came by the building. Nothing inappropriate. At least that's what I kept telling myself. We talked about work stress, relationships, regrets, growing older, all the things married people sometimes stop discussing honestly because they assume life is already settled. One day he asked me, "When's the last time you did something that actually made you feel alive?" I couldn't answer him. Not immediately. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. That silence changed something between us. I could feel it. He started looking at me differently after that. Softer somehow. More aware. And the horrifying part is that I liked it. I started dressing more carefully for work without consciously meaning to. Started checking whether his truck was outside before walking into the parking garage. Started waiting for conversations that absolutely should not have mattered this much. Meanwhile, Aaron was actually trying harder at home. That's what makes this story uglier. He started planning date nights again. Cooking dinner more often. Asking if I wanted to watch movies together like we used to. And instead of pulling me closer, it made me feel guilty and restless at the same time. Like part of me had already emotionally stepped outside the marriage even before anything happened physically. Then Caleb texted me for the first time. I hadn't even realized he'd saved my number from work forms. The message simply said, "You looked overwhelmed today." I stared at that text for almost 20 minutes. Because deep down, I knew replying would mean something. Not officially. Not rationally. But emotionally. Still, I answered. "Long week." His response came instantly. "You don't always have to pretend you're okay." And I swear something inside me cracked open after reading that. Because I had spent so many years pretending I was fine that I almost forgot what honesty felt like. That night, Aaron fell asleep beside me while I stared at my phone in the dark thinking about another man. And for the first time in my life, I understood how people cross lines they once believed they never would. After that first text, things escalated quietly. That's the scary part about emotional affairs. They don't usually feel dangerous in the beginning. They feel comforting. Safe. Like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. Caleb and I started messaging almost every day. At first it was harmless things. Complaints about work. Funny customer stories. Random observations during the day. Normal conversations. But emotionally, they didn't feel normal to me anymore. I started waiting for his texts. Checking my phone constantly. Smiling at messages while sitting beside my husband on the couch. And every time I realized what I was doing, guilt hit me like a punch to the chest. Aaron noticed changes too, even if he didn't understand them yet. One night during dinner, he looked at me strangely and said, "You seem happier lately." I almost dropped my fork. Because he sounded relieved when he said it. Relieved. Like he'd been worried about me longer than I realized. I smiled and blamed less stress at work. Lie number 1. Or maybe lie number 100 by that point. A week later, Caleb asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work. I knew I should say no. I actually typed, "I don't think that's a good idea," twice before deleting it. Instead, I answered, "Sure." Even now, looking back, that single word feels heavier than everything that came after. We met at a tiny coffee shop near the river where nobody from work usually went. I got there early and almost left twice because my nerves were so bad. When Caleb walked in, he smiled in this relieved way that instantly made things worse because it meant he'd been nervous too. The conversation felt effortless from the beginning. Too effortless. We talked for almost 3 hours without noticing time passing. Childhood stories. Failed dreams. Marriage. Fear of becoming emotionally numb. All the things people usually keep buried under everyday routines. At one point, Caleb asked me directly, "Are you happy?" I should have lied. Instead, I stared down at my coffee cup and whispered, "I think I used to be." The silence after that felt incredibly intimate. Not sexual. Worse. Honest. He didn't flirt with me. Didn't try touching me. Didn't make inappropriate comments. That's part of why I trusted him. And part of why I eventually fell for him. When we finally left the cafe, it had started raining outside. We stood awkwardly beneath the awning for a moment while traffic blurred through the wet streets around us. Then Caleb said quietly, "We should probably stop before this becomes something bad." My entire body reacted to that sentence immediately because suddenly everything unspoken between us became visible. I remember asking, "Do you want to stop?" He looked at me for a very long time before answering, "No." God. Even now I can remember how fast my heart started beating after he said that. Not because it was romantic. Because it felt real. And reality is much more dangerous than fantasy. He drove me to my car because of the rain. The entire ride felt unbearably tense. Not physical tension, exactly, anticipation. Like both of us understood we were standing at the edge of something irreversible. When we parked, neither of us moved. Caleb finally said softly, "You should go home." I nodded. But I still didn't open the door. Then his hand brushed mine accidentally while I reached for my purse. That tiny contact felt electric in a way that genuinely scared me. I pulled away immediately. Actually panicked a little. Because suddenly I realized how badly I wanted him to touch me again. I went home shaking from guilt. Aaron was asleep on the couch waiting for me when I walked in. One of those stupid home renovation shows was still playing quietly on TV. He woke up smiling. "You okay?" And I swear I nearly confessed everything right there. Instead, I kissed him and lied again. That night, while Aaron slept beside me, my phone buzzed. A message from Caleb. "I can still feel your hand shaking." I stared at the screen for almost an hour before replying. And that was the moment I truly crossed the line emotionally. Because deep down, I already knew this wasn't just attraction anymore. This was hunger. The kind that grows slowly inside lonely people until it becomes powerful enough to destroy things. I should have ended it after that. Any decent person probably would have. Delete the number. Block him. Focus on my marriage. Talk honestly with Aaron about how disconnected we'd become. Instead, I did the exact opposite. I got deeper. That's the hardest thing for me to admit now, because there wasn't one dramatic moment where I lost control. It happened through hundreds of small decisions I consciously made anyway. Every text. Every conversation. Every excuse. Caleb and I started talking constantly after that night. Morning messages. Late-night conversations. Tiny updates during the day that gradually became emotionally essential to me. And meanwhile, my marriage started feeling surreal. Aaron still loved me. I know he did. He'd kiss my forehead while making coffee. Ask if I needed gas in my car. Bring home my favorite snacks without being asked. Normal husband things. But somewhere along the way, our emotional connection had become quiet and predictable. Safe in a way that suddenly started feeling suffocating once I experienced something intense again. That realization filled me with shame. One Friday night, Aaron planned a date night downtown completely out of nowhere. Reservations at the Italian restaurant where he proposed to me years ago. The entire dinner I felt like a terrible person. Because he was trying. Really trying. At one point he reached across the table and smiled at me softly. It feels good having you back lately. That sentence almost made me cry right there in the restaurant. Because he thought I seemed more alive because of us. Not because another man had emotionally entered my bloodstream. When we got home, Aaron kissed me differently than usual. More intentionally. Like he was trying to reconnect with me physically after months of distance neither of us had talked about. And the horrifying part? Part of me responded. For a few minutes I actually believed maybe I could still save everything before it went too far. Then my phone buzzed. Just once. But I already knew it was Caleb. The second I looked at the screen, Aaron noticed. Tiny things give people away when guilt enters a relationship. The fast glance. The nervous movement. The shift in breathing. "Who's that?" he asked casually. I answered too quickly. "Work." "Lie." Aaron nodded slowly, but something changed in his expression for just a second. Awareness. Not certainty. But instinct. That night Caleb texted. "I miss talking to you already." I should have ignored it. Instead, I left my sleeping husband in bed, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and spent an hour texting another man while sitting on the floor. That's when I realized how dangerous this had become. Because it wasn't just emotional excitement anymore. It was dependency. A few days later, Caleb asked if I wanted to see his apartment. Not aggressively. Not sexually. Just casually after dinner one evening. I knew exactly what it meant anyway. The entire drive there I kept arguing with myself internally. You can still stop this. You can still go home. But I didn't turn the car around. Caleb lived alone in a small brick apartment across town. The place looked unfinished somehow. Half-built bookshelves. Unframed photos leaning against walls. Coffee cups everywhere. Evidence of an actual human life. Not fantasy anymore. Reality. When he opened the door, the tension between us became immediate and unbearable. Not lust exactly. Emotional gravity. Like two people standing too close to something they both know could ruin them. We sat on his couch talking for almost an hour before anything happened. About loneliness. Marriage. The terrifying feeling of waking up one day and realizing your life feels emotionally muted. At one point I admitted something I'd never said out loud before. I don't remember the last time I felt wanted. Caleb looked at me in this painfully gentle way after I said that. Not triumphant. Not predatory. Just sad. And honestly, that made me want him more. Eventually I stood up and said I should leave. He nodded immediately. No pressure. No manipulation. But when I walked past him near the kitchen, he touched my arm lightly. That was it. One small touch. And suddenly every wall I'd built collapsed at once. When he kissed me, I actually pulled away at first. Not because I didn't want it. Because I wanted it too much. "I can't do this," I whispered. But even while saying it, I already knew I was lying. Caleb rested his forehead against mine and said quietly, "Then tell me to stop." And God help me. I couldn't. The kiss became another. Then another. Slowly. Carefully. Like both of us were trying to delay the inevitable because once certain lines get crossed, nothing feels temporary anymore. Then my phone rang. Aaron. My entire body froze instantly. Reality crashed back into the room so hard it almost made me dizzy. I answered too fast. My voice sounded strange even to me. Aaron asked when I'd be home. I lied smoothly. Too smoothly. And that scared me almost more than the affair itself. Because suddenly I realized I was becoming someone I no longer recognized. After the call ended, Caleb looked at me for a long moment before asking softly, "Do you want me to stop?" And for the first time in my life, I knowingly chose the wrong answer. I said no. Quietly. But clearly enough that both of us understood what happened the second the word left my mouth. That was the moment everything changed. People imagine affairs as reckless explosions of passion where morality completely disappears, but honestly, the worst part was how aware I was the entire time. I knew this would destroy people. I knew I was betraying a man who genuinely loved me. And I still stayed. The first night Caleb and I slept together wasn't wild or cinematic like movies make these situations look. It was slow, emotional, almost unbearably intimate. And somehow that made the guilt worse. Because if it had only been physical, maybe I could have convinced myself it was just lust. A mistake. Something meaningless. Instead, it felt deeply personal. At one point afterward, I started crying. Actual shaking, embarrassed crying. Caleb immediately thought he'd done something wrong. He sat up asking if I was okay, if he should take me home, if I regretted everything. But the truth was more complicated. I was crying because I realized how emotionally alive I felt for the first time in years. And admitting that to myself felt like betraying my marriage even more than the sex itself. I remember lying beside him staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead while guilt crashed into me in waves so intense I felt physically sick. I just ruined my life, I whispered. Caleb was quiet for a long time before answering. Maybe we both did. That honesty made it worse somehow. No fantasy. No pretending this was harmless. Just two people fully aware they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I left around midnight. The drive home felt unreal. Like I was watching another woman destroy her marriage from outside her body. When I walked into the house, Aaron was asleep on the couch again waiting for me. The hallway light was still on. That tiny detail almost broke me completely. I stood in the kitchen staring at him for several minutes while this horrible pressure built in my chest. I genuinely considered waking him up and confessing everything immediately. Instead, I showered for almost 40 minutes trying to wash away guilt that clearly wasn't physical. When I finally got into bed, Aaron rolled over in his sleep and wrapped an arm around my waist automatically. And I swear I nearly started sobbing. The next morning was torture. Aaron made pancakes because it was Saturday. He played music while cooking and asked if I wanted to go hiking later because we haven't done that in forever. I sat there drinking coffee across from the man I cheated on less than 8 hours earlier while he smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. That kind of guilt changes you permanently. Every normal interaction becomes painful. Every act of kindness feels undeserved. And the worst part? Even after all that guilt, I still wanted Caleb. That's when I realized how deep this had already gone. The emotional connection between us intensified after we crossed the physical line. Instead of satisfying something, it made everything stronger. More dangerous. We started seeing each other constantly whenever we could. Lunches became entire afternoons together. Quick conversations became hours. Touching became natural, frighteningly fast. Meanwhile, my marriage turned into a performance I participated in every evening. Aaron noticed changes immediately. One night while brushing our teeth together, he suddenly looked at me through the mirror and asked, "Are you unhappy with me?" The question hit so directly I froze. I tried dodging it. Asked why he'd say that. Aaron shrugged slightly, but I could see hurt behind his eyes. "You just feel far away lately." Because I was. Emotionally, mentally, physically, part of me was already somewhere else. I almost confessed right there. Instead, I blamed stress. Work. Burnout. More lies. Aaron nodded like he wanted to believe me, then hugged me from behind while we stood in the bathroom together. And suddenly I felt split between two completely different lives. One safe and loyal and familiar. The other intense and consuming and emotionally electric. I hated myself because I already knew which one I craved more. A week later, Caleb admitted something that made the situation even more dangerous. He told me he was falling in love with me. I should have ended it immediately after hearing that. Instead, I kissed him first. After Caleb said he was falling in love with me, everything became emotionally unbearable. Because suddenly this wasn't an affair anymore. It was a relationship. A secret, destructive, impossible relationship, but real all the same. And the terrifying part was that I felt it too. I tried denying it at first. Mostly to myself. I kept telling myself this was temporary. That eventually the guilt would overpower the excitement and I'd come to my senses. Instead, the opposite happened. The more time I spent with Caleb, the harder ordinary life became. He noticed everything about me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. If I sounded tired over the phone, he noticed. If something upset me, he noticed immediately even when I pretended otherwise. And after years of feeling emotionally muted inside my marriage, that level of attention became addictive. Aaron noticed the change too. One Sunday morning, we were grocery shopping together when he looked over at me in the cereal aisle and smiled. "You seem lighter lately." That sentence hit me like a knife because he sounded genuinely happy about it. Happy that I seemed alive again. Without realizing another man was the reason. I smiled weakly and changed the subject. At that point, lying had become frighteningly easy. That scared me more than anything else. I used to think dishonest people were fundamentally different from me. But apparently all it takes is enough loneliness and enough emotional temptation before you start becoming someone unrecognizable. A few nights later, Caleb and I rented a hotel room outside the city because we were apparently fully living inside a cliché now. The entire drive there I felt physically sick from anxiety. Not because I didn't want to go. Because I wanted to too badly. That's what made me feel dangerous. Afterward, we lay in silence for a while listening to traffic outside the hotel window. The emotional intensity between us had started shifting into something heavier recently. Less fantasy. More reality. At one point, Caleb quietly asked, "If your marriage was actually happy, would you still be here?" I answered too quickly. No. But afterward, I kept staring at the ceiling, wondering whether that was entirely true. Because Aaron and I weren't miserable. That's what complicated everything. We still laughed together. Shared routines. Loved each other in many ways. There wasn't cruelty between us. Just emotional erosion, so gradual we barely noticed it happening until I suddenly felt seen somewhere else. And once you experience that contrast, it becomes impossible to ignore. Later that night, Caleb admitted he'd considered quitting his job entirely because seeing me every day was emotionally wrecking him. That shook me more than hearing he loved me. Because suddenly this wasn't just secret excitement anymore. Real-life decisions were forming around us. What would happen if you left? I asked quietly. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. I think I'd still want you. God. I still remember how that sentence felt in my chest. Because deep down, I already knew I'd still want him too. Meanwhile, my marriage was quietly cracking apart under the pressure of things Aaron couldn't fully see yet. One evening, he asked if we could plan a vacation together, like old times. I remember staring at him across the kitchen table, feeling this awful combination of affection and distance simultaneously. Like I loved him deeply, but no longer knew how to fully reach him emotionally. That realization devastated me. Aaron started trying harder physically too. More affection. More attention. More effort. Almost like some instinct inside him sensed me drifting away. And honestly, sometimes it almost pulled me back. There were moments lying beside him where I remembered exactly why I married him. Moments where I thought maybe I could still stop this before it completely destroyed us. Then my phone would buzz. Or Caleb would look at me a certain way. And suddenly all that emotional intensity rushed back again. The real disaster happened 2 weeks later. Aaron came home early from work unexpectedly. And Caleb was standing in my kitchen holding one of our coffee mugs. The second I heard the garage door opening, my entire body went cold. Not nervous. Not scared. Pure panic. Caleb heard it too. We both froze instantly. It's strange what your brain notices in moments like that. The sound of keys hitting the counter. The hum of the refrigerator. My own heartbeat pounding so hard it almost drowned everything else out. Aaron was home. And my affair was standing 10 feet away inside our kitchen. To make this worse, Caleb wasn't even there for sex. That somehow feels important. Aaron was supposed to be gone until late evening for a work seminar in another city. Caleb had come over because I'd spent the entire morning emotionally spiraling after an argument with my sister, and he wanted to check on me. That's how deeply inappropriate this relationship had become. He wasn't just someone I desired anymore. He had become part of my emotional survival system. Then Aaron walked in. The moment his eyes landed on Caleb, the atmosphere changed immediately. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just wrong. You know how animals sense danger before they understand it? That's exactly what happened in that room. Aaron stopped walking. Caleb straightened slightly. And I felt all the oxygen disappear from my lungs. This is Caleb, I blurted out way too quickly. The elevator contractor I mentioned before. Aaron looked between us carefully. I'll never forget that expression for the rest of my life. Because I could literally see his brain trying to solve a puzzle in real time. Why was another man inside his house? Why did his wife look terrified? Why did the room feel emotionally charged instantly? Caleb recovered faster than I did. He stepped forward calmly and held out his hand. Sorry, I was just leaving. Aaron shook his hand automatically. Polite. Controlled. But his eyes never fully left me. And deep down, I knew something had already broken. Maybe not certainty, but trust. Caleb left less than a minute later. The front door closed. Silence. Then Aaron asked quietly, "What's going on?" Not angry. Not yelling. Honestly, that made it worse. I immediately started lying. Too fast. Too defensive. I said Caleb stopped by because he was nearby for work and I offered coffee since it was raining. Even while speaking, I could hear how weak it sounded. Aaron listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question that cornered me instantly. Why did you look scared when I walked in? I laughed nervously and blamed being startled, but Aaron knows me too well. Or at least he used to. He stared at me for a very long time before finally asking, "Are you cheating on me?" There it was. The moment I'd been dreading for months. And I wish I could say I confessed right then. Maybe that would have been kinder. Instead, I denied it immediately. Hard. Too hard. The look on Aaron's face after that denial honestly still destroys me when I think about it. Because he wanted to believe me. You could actually see it. He nodded slowly like he was forcing himself to trust me even while some deeper instinct screamed that something was wrong. Then he quietly said something that nearly shattered me completely. If something's happening, please don't make me feel crazy first. God. That sentence. Because that's exactly what I was doing. Making him question his own instincts while actively betraying him. I started crying almost immediately after he said it. Not strategically. Not manipulative crying. Genuine emotional collapse. Aaron moved toward me automatically like he always did when I cried, and without thinking I stepped backward. The hurt that crossed his face happened instantly. Sharp. Visible. That was the first moment I think he truly understood this wasn't innocent. We barely spoke the rest of the evening. Aaron became quieter than I'd ever seen him before. Not angry. Not accusing. Just emotionally withdrawn. Like he was internally rearranging his entire understanding of reality. Meanwhile, I was falling apart psychologically. Caleb texted later asking if I was okay. I ignored it. Then he called. Ignored that too. I sat on the bathroom floor for nearly an hour trying to understand how my life had become this unrecognizable. Because here's the horrifying truth. Even after almost getting caught, part of me still wanted Caleb. That's when I realized how deeply trapped I already was emotionally. The next morning, Aaron left for work without kissing me goodbye. Such a tiny thing. But after 12 years together, it felt catastrophic. I cried after he left. Then I drove straight to Caleb's apartment anyway. I know how terrible that sounds. But at that point, my emotions had stopped making rational sense. The fear of losing Caleb felt almost as overwhelming as the fear of losing my marriage. I was emotionally splitting apart trying to hold on to both lives at once. When I told Caleb what happened, he listened quietly the entire time. Then he said something that made my stomach drop instantly. He knows. I shook my head immediately. He suspects. Caleb looked at me carefully. No, he said softly. Maybe he doesn't know everything. But he knows enough. And deep down, I realized he was right. For the next few days, Aaron barely spoke to me unless necessary. That silence was worse than yelling would have been. No screaming. No accusations. Just distance. 12 years together, and suddenly it felt like there was glass between us. He still said, "Good morning." Still asked if I needed anything from the store. Still folded laundry beside me one evening while the TV played quietly in the background. But emotionally, he had pulled away. And the horrifying part was that I could feel exactly why. Trust had shifted. Even without proof, some instinct inside him already understood our marriage wasn't safe anymore. Meanwhile, Caleb kept asking if I was okay. The answer was obviously no. But I couldn't stay away from him either. That's what finally made me realize this wasn't excitement anymore. It was emotional addiction. One Thursday afternoon, Caleb and I met in his truck inside an empty parking garage because apparently I had fully become the kind of woman who held secret meetings with another man. The reality of that made me feel sick. Caleb looked exhausted too. tired in a deeper emotional way. "This can't keep going like this," he said quietly. I knew he was right. The stress had become unbearable. Every text notification terrified me. Every glance from Aaron felt loaded with hidden meaning. And still, when Caleb touched my hand, my entire body reacted immediately. That terrified me most of all. "How do I stop wanting this?" I whispered. Caleb looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. No heroic speech. No fake promises. Just honesty." And somehow that honesty made the connection between us even stronger. A few nights later, everything finally collapsed. Aaron had fallen asleep on the couch while watching TV. My phone was charging on the coffee table beside him. I had deleted most conversations with Caleb obsessively for weeks, but earlier that day I got careless. One message remained. Just one. And it was enough. I woke up around midnight and walked into the living room to find Aaron sitting in darkness holding my phone. The second I saw his face, I knew. Not suspected. Knew. There's a specific kind of fear that happens when your secret life crashes into reality. It feels less like panic and more like your entire nervous system suddenly realizing there's nowhere left to hide. Aaron looked shattered already. Not furious. Destroyed. And, honestly, that was worse. He held up the phone slightly. "I was trying to convince myself I was imagining things," he said quietly. My stomach collapsed instantly. Because I already knew which message he'd seen. "I miss your hands on me." God. Even typing that now makes me feel sick. Aaron asked the question that mattered more than anything else. "How long?" I started crying immediately. That reaction answered him before words did. "A few months," I whispered. The silence afterward felt endless. Then came the questions. Not screaming. Not rage. Confusion. Pain. Who is he really? Do you love him? Did you sleep with him? And finally, was any of our marriage real to you? That question broke something inside me completely. Because despite everything, the answer was yes. My marriage was real. My love for Aaron was real. That's what made this entire situation so horrifyingly complicated. People want betrayal to be simple. One villain. One victim. But real life is uglier than that. I loved my husband. And I still cheated on him anyway. Eventually, I admitted the affair. Not every detail. I couldn't bring myself to do that to him. But enough. Enough to devastate him. At one point, Aaron stood up and had to brace himself against the kitchen counter like the conversation physically hurt. I had never seen him emotionally broken before. Not once in 12 years. Then he asked something so painfully vulnerable I still hear it in my head constantly. "What did he give you that I couldn't?" I didn't know how to answer honestly without sounding monstrous. Because the truth wasn't about sex. Or attraction. Or excitement. It was attention. Presence. The feeling of being emotionally visible again. I tried explaining that somewhere along the way we stopped truly seeing each other. Aaron looked at me with tears in his eyes and quietly said, "I never stopped seeing you." That sentence destroyed me completely. Because suddenly I realized something unbearable. Maybe he had been trying to reach me all along. And maybe I had already emotionally left before I admitted it even to myself. We talked for hours that night. Crying. Long silences. Questions neither of us wanted answers to. Eventually, Aaron asked if I wanted to leave him. And the horrifying truth was, I didn't know. I don't know. The second those words left my mouth, I watched something inside Aaron collapse. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a structure finally giving out after carrying too much weight for too long. And honestly, I think that uncertainty hurt him more than the affair itself. Because if I'd simply fallen out of love, maybe this would have made sense. Maybe there would have been a clear ending. A clean emotional narrative. But I still loved him. That was the problem. I loved my husband while being emotionally attached to another man at the exact same time. Human beings are capable of incredibly ugly contradictions. Aaron eventually asked me to leave for the night. Not angrily. Almost politely. Which somehow made everything worse. I packed a bag while crying so hard I could barely breathe. Every object in the bedroom suddenly felt loaded with memories. The framed photos from vacations. His hoodie hanging over the chair. The life we spent 12 years building together. And the sickest part? I already knew where I was going. Caleb opened the door before I even knocked fully. The second he saw my face, he understood. He pulled me inside immediately while I completely fell apart emotionally. I told him everything. Aaron finding the message, the confrontation, the questions, the tears. At one point I admitted something I hadn't even fully admitted to myself yet. I think I destroyed the best thing I ever had. Caleb pulled back slightly after I said that. Not angry, but hurt. Because suddenly he understood something important. Part of me still belonged emotionally to my husband. And honestly, part of me probably always would. That realization changed the atmosphere between us immediately. The fantasy cracked a little. Reality entered the room. Caleb eventually asked the question we'd both been avoiding for months. What happens now? I didn't know. My marriage might already be over. Aaron wanted space. And suddenly the affair itself no longer felt exciting. It felt catastrophic. Later that night, Aaron called me unexpectedly. I answered immediately because some part of me still panicked anytime he sounded emotionally distant. His voice was strange, flat, emotionally hollowed out. Then he said something that completely changed my understanding of our marriage. There's something I never told you. My stomach dropped instantly. Aaron admitted that about a year earlier, during a conference trip, he slept with a woman from work. One time. According to him, it happened during one of the lowest emotional periods in our marriage, back when we barely touched each other and spent entire weeks functioning more like exhausted roommates than partners. The woman was the same one who wrote on the hotel receipt I found in the sketchbook box. You deserve to feel wanted again. Hearing that sentence out loud felt surreal. Suddenly, everything rearranged itself in my mind. Aaron explained that he regretted it immediately afterward. He ended things instantly and spent the following year trying desperately to reconnect with me emotionally without confessing why he suddenly felt so guilty and terrified of losing me. The date nights, the affection, the extra effort, all of it came from guilt. And meanwhile, I interpreted his attempts as routine. Forced. Too late. God. I don't think I've ever felt emotional devastation like that moment. Because suddenly nobody was innocent anymore. Not him. Not me. Just two lonely people quietly collapsing inside the same marriage at different times. I asked why he never told me. Aaron answered softly. Because it was the worst thing I've ever done. That sentence lodged itself deep inside my chest. Because I understood it perfectly. The horrifying thing was realizing we had both betrayed each other while trying to survive the exact same emotional starvation. Different timelines. Different choices. Same loneliness. After the call ended, Caleb sat beside me in silence for a long time. Then he finally said, "This whole thing started way before either of us met." And he was right. The affair suddenly stopped feeling like the central tragedy. The real tragedy was how long Aaron and I had been emotionally disappearing beside each other without fully admitting it. The next morning, I went back home. Aaron was sitting alone in the kitchen drinking coffee when I walked in. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. We talked for hours that day more honestly than we had in years. About resentment. Routine. Loneliness. The way marriages slowly become administrative if people stop nurturing emotional intimacy. At one point, Aaron quietly asked, "Do you love him?" And for the first time since this nightmare began, I answered honestly, "Yes." Aaron closed his eyes after that. I think hearing it spoken aloud hurt more than the cheating itself ever could. Then he asked the impossible question, "Do you still love me too?" And the answer was yes. That's the part nobody warns you about. Love doesn't always disappear before betrayal arrives. Sometimes it stays. And makes everything infinitely more painful. It's been 4 months since everything exploded. 4 months since Aaron found the message. 4 months since I stopped being able to pretend I was still the same person I used to think I was. And honestly, I still don't fully know how to explain what happened to us without sounding selfish, no matter which version I tell. Aaron and I are separated now. Not divorced. Not repaired either. Just suspended somewhere painful in between. He moved into a small apartment across town because staying in the house became emotionally unbearable for both of us. Every room felt contaminated with memories and lies. For a while we still spoke every day. Mostly practical things at first. Bills. Mail. The dog. Then slowly the conversations became emotional again in ways neither of us expected. Which feels tragic when I think about it now. It took destroying our marriage for us to finally become honest with each other again. Caleb and I tried being together openly after everything came out. That's probably the ending people expect, right? The passionate affair becomes a real relationship. The woman leaves her emotionally dead marriage and finally feels alive again. Except real life doesn't work like movies. Once secrecy disappeared, so did part of the intensity we confused with destiny. Not all of it. I still loved him. Maybe part of me always will. But without the stolen hours, hidden messages, and emotional escape from ordinary life, things changed. Reality entered the relationship. And reality is heavier than fantasy. The guilt stayed. The adrenaline vanished. Suddenly we weren't two people surviving on emotional obsession anymore. We were just two exhausted human beings standing inside the wreckage of multiple lives trying to build something normal from destruction. That's much less romantic than affairs look from the outside. A few weeks ago, Caleb admitted something that honestly shattered me. We were eating takeout in silence when he quietly said, "I think we became oxygen for each other." I knew exactly what he meant. For months, we weren't just lovers. We were escape routes. Proof that we could still feel intensely after years of emotional numbness. But building an actual life together afterward turned out to be something completely different. Especially because neither of us could forget the cost. Aaron still calls me sometimes late at night. Not to yell. Not to blame me. Honestly, his kindness through all this has probably hurt more than anger would have. A few days ago, he called asking if I remembered our first apartment together. The tiny place with broken heating where we used to sleep wearing hoodies because we couldn't afford repairs yet. We ended up talking for nearly 2 hours. Laughing sometimes. Crying too. At one point, Aaron admitted something that completely broke me emotionally. I kept thinking if I became better, maybe you'd come back to me. God. That sentence still hurts to breathe through. Because I realized he'd been trying to repair us alone long before Caleb entered my life. And meanwhile, I was quietly drifting toward another man instead of turning back toward my husband. That guilt is something I don't think ever fully disappears. People online talk about cheating like there's always one evil person and one innocent victim. But life is messier than that. Aaron cheated too. I cheated worse. We both neglected things. We both stayed silent too long. We both confused stability with emotional connection. And somewhere inside all of that, we lost each other slowly enough that neither of us noticed the exact moment it happened. That's the part that scares me most now. Not the affair itself. The emotional distance that existed years before it. The way two people can still say, "I love you" every night while quietly starving emotionally beside each other. Caleb ended things with me 3 weeks ago. Not cruelly. Honestly, he looked devastated doing it. He said neither of us entered the relationship as complete people. We entered it wounded, lonely, desperate to feel alive again. And once reality replaced fantasy, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Before he left my apartment that night, he said something that still replays in my head constantly. "You weren't evil. Just lonely enough to become dangerous." I think that's the most honest description of this entire disaster. Loneliness doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like routines. Shared grocery lists. Polite conversations. A marriage that appears stable from the outside while both people quietly disappear inside it. And if I'm being completely honest, some broken part of me still misses the affair. Not just Caleb. The feeling, the intensity, the emotional electricity of becoming visible again after years of numbness. Which probably makes me a terrible person. Maybe I am. But at least now the secret is finally gone.